Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Whee! I just love Los Angeles, Tim. All the celebrities, all that money, just so much to do and see.
Yep, Tim, you're right. You know, you never know who you're going to run into along Hollywood and find. All the celebrities are out there. I could have sworn that I saw Marilyn Monroe and Bob Hope, but they must have been celebrity lookalikes.
Well, I'm not sure, but you know, I've heard that Los Angeles and Hollywood is really overrun with ghosts. Some of the most haunted places in America are here.
I hear that the Roosevelt Hotel is overrun with phantoms. I say we stop by and see if we can't communicate with someone who has passed over. You know, I'm such a great medium. If I had anything to do with it, I would still go out with Marilyn.
Marilyn? Well, alive or dead, I don't think she would go out with you when she could have someone like, I don't know, Rock Hudson on her arm.
Yep, but I think we would rather have a handsome young man to escort him to the next Academy Awards.
Oh, that's right. Well, it's getting a little too spooky around here. Let's head back to the KCOR studios and find out just how haunted Los Angeles really is.
Well, let me get the cobwebs out of my face first, and then we'll go back. But I'm looking forward to venturing out again this evening. And I bet you are too, Tim.
Yes. I love Los Angeles. I love Southern California. As long as the ground isn't shaking, it's a great place to be.
That's true, but it's easier to do a little boogie and a little dance if the ground is shaking, I would say.
There you go.
We're on the solid ground here for the moment in Las Vegas, or at least I think it's solid, because last week when they had those two quakes, I believe it was felt in Vegas. So you never know. I mean, even here in the Big Apple, we've had the window and all shake a couple of times. People don't realize that I'm on a fault line that runs right underneath the building here with all these skyscrapers. I mean, if anything really happened, I'd have cement and brick all over me, which I do anyway, I guess. But enough of our idle chatter here. We're about to get as serious as we possibly can be. And Tim, why don't you tell us who we're going to be speaking to this evening?
Why, it would be my pleasure. Tonight, I'm very happy to say that we have CRAIG Owens with us. Now, CRAIG is a Los Angeles-based photographer, and he first fell in love with history and the paranormal in 1972 when he was a 7-year-old boy playing on the grounds of a southern plantation known as Waverly, located outside of West Point, Mississippi. I've heard of Waverly, by the way. So while the Waverly owners admitted to seeing and hearing the ghost of a young female child, well, CRAIG never encountered her, yet the atmosphere and history of Waverly stayed with him long after his family moved to Texas. Now, in 1994, he moved to Los Angeles and began to work freelance in the film and television industry, and his production credits include Fudge, The Christmas Box, Wag the Dog, Phone Booth, and The Gilmore Girls. So in 2009, CRAIG began staging vintage-style photo shoots at haunted hotels as an idea for an old Hollywood-themed project. And while on location, he experienced paranormal activity himself, and this left him wondering if his photo shoots were somehow triggering it. So the following year, he started his Facebook blog, Bizarre Los Angeles, a page dedicated to Los Angeles' forgotten history. He also continued to hold vintage photo shoots at haunted locations, and little did he know that his love for haunted hotels would bring media attention to him. Now, Craig has gained notoriety for his photography and his passion for historical research, and he has also appeared in other people's books, including Gourmet Ghost 2 by James Bartlett and Ghostland, An American History in Haunted Places by Colin Dickey. So now, Craig's book that we're going to be talking about tonight, as well as his Facebook page, Bizarre LA, is Haunted by History, Volume 1, separating the facts and legends of 8 historic hotels and inns in Southern California. So, Craig, great to have you with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for having me. So which one's Tim and which one's Tim?
I'm Tim. The other one's Tim.
There you go. 2 Tims to confuse, just to confuse our audience. Hey, you know what I got to ask you, Craig, to start off? Did you have any paranormal experiences growing up, or did you just kind of fall into this?
A little bit of both. I had very minor paranormal experiences growing up, but I did fall into it in around 2009. But I always said that there was about 4 or 5 different episodes in my life that kind of led me to this point in my career where I'm actually talking about ghosts more than I'm talking about anything else. The first one is, as you mentioned, at Waverly Plantation. And by the way, thanks a lot for that intro. That's great. I appreciate it. I didn't encounter the ghost girl there. And it always bugged me. I had heard about it when I was about 7 years old, and I would actually go and look for it whenever I would visit Waverly, which was quite a bit. I mean, I'd be there almost every 2 weeks or so, and I had a couple of sleepovers, but nothing really ever came of it. But by the way, very few people ever saw that little ghost girl. Others have encountered her or have heard her voice, but very few people have actually seen her, even to this day.
What did she look like?
I want to say she was, she was Victorian dressed, probably late 19th century, mid to late 19th century, about 5-6 years old. And, you know, kind of the curly hair from what I understand. And I don't know if her dress was white. I believe it was. But the only 2 people who had seen the ghost that I'm aware of was Mrs. Snow, the late owner of the house. She was the first one to see her, and then a couple of decades later her daughter saw the child ghost.
And you say this was a plantation?
Yes, it was a former plantation. It actually, the antebellum home preceded the Civil War. It still was massive, still massive acreage. And currently it's for sale, I believe, still, because both of the owners that I grew up with and knowing have since passed, and it's very expensive to maintain that property.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. Tim and I have been looking to buy a haunted plantation, right, Tim?
Oh yeah, that's right. Sure.
Well, that's the one. That's the one to buy. It's gorgeous.
As long as there's some ghost cooking in the kitchen. So I want that southern fried chicken and grits. That's
okay. The odd thing about that particular haunting is they actually did try to find out the identity of the ghost girl child. And prior to the Snows owning the home, it only had one other family that owned it. And all of them are accounted for, so no one really knows for sure. And when I say accounted for, I mean that they're not all still alive, but none of them died in the house, according to records. So they came to the conclusion that maybe it was either a distant relative or a neighboring child that had visited the place. it was obviously someone with a emotional connection to the property, because the child would cry out for her mommy. So whatever was there was lost or looking for their mom.
Now, when you got to Hollywood, let's skip across the country.
Sure.
When you got to Hollywood, you were in the movie and television business, working for the studios or independently?
Yes, independently, but I was freelance, doing what most people do when they arrive in Los Angeles and are trying to break in, and that's working as a production assistant. And that's actually, I had to come out here. I mean, I was living in Texas at the time, and I had a film degree and had done just about everything I knew what to do in Texas to save money to come out to Los Angeles. So I did. That was where I felt home. And it took almost a year for me to finally get my break working in the film industry. So it was all go. But I was a huge old Hollywood fan. And so I would, when I had days off, which sometimes there were a lot, sometimes not at all, I would go and try to visit some of these old places around LA while they were still standing, and just kind of take in and absorb, because that's the LA I fell in love with. That's the LA I used to see in the old movies and television shows, not the new stuff so much. So I was greatly drawn to the old Hollywood mystique, so to speak.
Yeah, even the stunt men are animated today.
Oh, terrific.
Everything is animated. I mean, I like a little action in my movie, but Dwayne Johnson, I mean, riding a torpedo across the ice is a little much. I mean, they just overdo it. What was the first ghost that you encountered? I mean, that you heard about. I mean, I guess Marilyn Monroe is said to haunt several places, I would imagine, right?
Yeah,
she's certainly welcome. Yeah.
Well, I've done my research on almost all of those places, because I kind of came in as a somewhat skeptic. I always say I'm a reluctant skeptic. I have had enough paranormal experiences that has led me to believe that something real is out there, that is paranormal related, that ghosts do in fact exist. However, a lot of the stories are not so true. And so trying to, track down Marilyn Monroe, yes, she haunts a lot of different places. So does Rudolph Valentino. And there's a lot of myths out here. There's, Clark Gable and Charlie Chaplin and Greta Garbo. If you believed all the stories, they owned half of Los Angeles at one time or another. And that's simply just not true, So trying to separate the facts from the fiction is a bit of a challenge, because some of these stories have been told for decades, and some people don't want to give up their urban legends or their alternative facts. But I will tell you, this is a great segue. My first paranormal experience, one of the heaviest ones, was actually while I was working as a production assistant at Warner Brothers Studio in Burbank. Now that kind of was one of the tipping points, one of the stepping stones that led me to get more heavily involved in paranormal and historic research. I was working on a television series in 1999. It was a terrible series. Don't even bother to you won't remember it if I
gonna run to Amazon Prime right now and look it up.
Yeah, it was with Marky Post. She was the biggest name on the show at the time, but it lasted less than one season. However, while I was running around dropping scripts off on Halloween night, believe it or not, I go into the Soundstage, and it's the oldest remaining soundstage on Warner Brothers. I believe it was completed around 1929. And as I was I had about 50 scripts in my arms for this television show, and everyone had gone hours ago because everyone had to go to their Halloween parties and go trick-or-treating with their kids. So I was like the last man standing. for the production crew. So I come into this dark soundstage. I flip on the lights. The lights are acting crazy. I climb up the old wood stairs to some little offices on a second floor. And after dropping off several scripts up there, I became aware of a woman's voice speaking somewhere down below on this from the main soundstage area. And at first I thought someone had left a radio on or a television set on, and I couldn't quite make out what the woman was saying. She had kind of a deep voice, almost like a whiskey voice, so to speak, and I couldn't make out what she was saying. I could make out sounds, I can make out consonants and vowels, but putting them together was a whole nother thing. So I stood on that railing and I went, wow, that is so weird. I was thinking to myself, so I decided I would just hang out there for a little while and try to determine where that sound was coming from. And that voice continued to talk off and on. There were some pregnant pauses. There was some, silence. That kept going on for over 20 minutes. It was amazing. And I couldn't make out a single word during that time. And the lights never really turned on. The work lights overhead, half of them never turned on, which was incredibly unusual because I had been working on that stage for something like 4 years with various different shows. And those lights had never misbehaved like they were that night. So after about 20, 25 minutes, I still had a bunch of scripts to drop off. And I decided at that moment I really needed to get back to work, as fascinating as everything was. But I tried to sneak down the stairs to see if I could somehow sneak up on whatever it was that was, walking and moving around and talking. And when you know it, just like kind of the cliche, as soon as I hit that bottom stairs, that voice stopped. And there was no more voices. So I went and dropped the scripts off in the middle of the stage. The lights were blinking very frantically. And I did do a little walkthrough around the stage just to make sure that there was no radio or TV on. But I already had ruled that out, several minutes ago. Nothing there, quiet. But as I started walking from the set to the door where I had entered, I became aware of women's heels walking behind me. And at first it was, quite a distance. And I thought, God, that's weird. It's not talking. The heels aren't clacking at the same speed or beat as my footsteps. So once I became aware of it, and the swishing of fabric of like a dress, whatever was following me was obviously, it sounded like she was wearing a dress and wearing heels. Wasn't talking, but just walking. And I reached a point where I, stopped in my tracks and I swung around like a gunslinger, thinking I might be able to catch whoever was pulling the prank on me, and no one was there. The odd thing was the footsteps did not stop in time with mine. It was like a little stutter step, and then it stopped. So once it quieted down and the only thing there was the buzzing and flickering of lights overhead, I turned back and started walking again. I walk about 4 or 5 steps. Suddenly, I'm aware of this female's footsteps clicking behind me again, the swishing of fabric. And interestingly enough, this time the steps got closer. And by this time, I was in wide open space on the soundstage. So there was literally nothing to hide behind. So that's when I stopped, turned around again a second time. No one was there. The footsteps stopped again, but not exactly in sync with mine. And that was it for me. I think I'd had enough of the ghost for that night. So I just quickly and hurriedly walked to the door, turned off the light, shouted something like, "Hi, nice meeting you, happy Halloween," whatever. And I went outside and I was shaking for about 10, 15 minutes. But I sat parked in a golf cart waiting. I was still hoping against hope that some prankster was doing a Halloween prank on me, and they would come out of that dark soundstage. No one came out. I went back to work. When I mentioned what happened to the my supervisor, he didn't believe me. He didn't care. He was like, "Are you trying to tell me you got haunted on Halloween?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. It's a little hard to believe." So it was all forgotten, except that I kept remembering it. And then 17 years later, after my book came out, I met someone that actually had worked security for over 10 years. And I started telling him my story. And before I even finished it, he already guessed what soundstage it was. It was Soundstage 4 at Warner Brothers. And I was like, oh, God, finally, someone corroborated my experience. And the security guard said, yeah, you're not the only one that's heard the woman's voice and have heard the woman's footsteps.
Do we know who the woman might have been?
Have no idea. But, Warner Brothers is situated across Forest Lawn Drive from the Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills Memorial Park. So a lot of the contract players, including Betty Davis, who was with Warner Brothers for years, is actually buried or interred up there in the Hollywood Hills Forest Lawn. Same with George Raft, who, wouldn't have been wearing a dress and clucking around in heels, but he was under contract with Warner Brothers in the late 50s.
How do you know that? Do you know that for a fact? You didn't read Confidential magazine in the old days?
Well, I hadn't heard anything about that yet, but George Raft was known for a lot of things, but cross-dressing was not one of them.
Yeah, wasn't one of them. No, okay. Well, who would you say, now, taking into account all the cases or all the ghosts that you've chased down, who would you say is the most often reportedly seen, or what ghost pops up most frequently, and would that be an authentic ghost or a fabrication?
Most of the most frequently popping up are fabrications, but I would say that it's a toss-up between Rudolph Valentino and Marilyn Monroe as far as being the ghost with the most, as far as getting around in Los Angeles. And I take on a couple of those Valentino sightings and have pretty much been able to disprove that it's him. One is at the Alexandria Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, which that ghost story started around 1996. And the Alexandria is one of the books covered in my own book. So I really went deep into the history of the Alexandria and determined that the infamous Valentino Suite that he supposedly haunts was not actually a suite he ever stayed in. It was named in his honor in 1970. However, having said that, when I did my photo shoot in the Valentino Suite, there was definitely something paranormal haunting that place, and it made its presence known during the shoot.
All right, let's finish this up, and we will go to our bottom of the hour break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Craig Owens. Stay tuned.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we're talking with Craig Owens. He's got the Facebook page Bizarre LA and his book Haunted by History, Volume 1. So, Craig, you had said earlier in the program about how when you had time off, you like to wander through LA and look at some of the historical buildings, but I guess that a lot of the ones that supposedly were so well known are now long gone.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I used to live almost right across the street from the Los Angeles Ambassador Hotel, and that was torn down in 2005 and 2006, actually. And that was the home of the Coconut Grove. It had a lot of history. It opened in 1921. That a lot of your swanky Hollywood crowd was there, but it was also the site where Robert Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And that place, I did have the opportunity to go in there a couple of times before they tore it down. And that place, I always felt that was a building that felt alive. It may be empty, or there may be some stray cats around the property, but there was such an energy there that you could almost like hear in your inner ear the music and the conversations, the music wafting in from the Coconut Grove, and it was just a lot of emotions in that place, and it was spooky. And of course, it was supposed to have been very haunted as well, but it's all gone. It's now the site of the RFK Learning Center, a kind of in my opinion, an ostentatious reimagining of the old Ambassador Hotel and like the Disney music concert hall. It's pretty tacky looking, in my opinion. But I've never gotten over the heartbreak of losing the Ambassador, because that should have been the line in the sand for preservationists out here in Los Angeles. And that's one of the reasons why that prompted me to write my book on haunted historic hotels, the ones that are still standing, the ones that need love and attention, and for people to understand them and appreciate them anew, because what happened at the Ambassador should never have happened.
So now the hotels that you feature in your book, you have the Hotel del Coronado, the Victorian Rose Bed and Breakfast, the Julian Gold Rush Hotel, the Mission Inn Hotel and Spa, the Alexandria Hotel, the Wyndham Garden Ventura Pierpoint Inn, the Banning House Lodge, and the Glen Tavern Inn. Now, what process did you go through to pick those particular hotels out to feature in your book?
Well, I kind of looked at it as like a mall. You wanted your anchor stores and you have your little boutiques. And so I had to have, certain iconic hotels like the Hotel del Coronado and the Mission Inn. The Del is located in San Diego County. The Mission Inn's in Riverside, California. And so I was canvassing Southern California, not just Los Angeles. But I had to include a location in Los Angeles, so I chose the Alexandria Hotel, even though it's not a functioning hotel these days. It's low-income housing. However, when it opened in 1906, it was Los Angeles's very first five-star hotel, the first one it ever had, and it dominated all hotels up until the Ambassador Hotel opened in 1921. And oddly enough, when doing my research, what I discovered was that the owners of the Alexandria Hotel at that time were the same as the owners of the Ambassador Hotel. So that's the Ambassador Hotel would never have been built had it not been for the clout and the success of the Alexandria. So most historians, I discovered, did not know this.
So you did, and in the research for your book on these hotels, I mean, you really did your research for these locations. I mean, you didn't just go to the library or the internet and found stories that other people had written. I mean, you went out there and did the legwork all yourself.
Oh yeah, well, I've operated up to this point. I've operated under the theory that all hauntings are historically based. There's something in the history that will provide clues as to what the hauntings are going to be. And for instance, everyone talks yada, yada, yada about, the ghost of Kate Morgan haunting the Hotel del Coronado. That's the only ghost that the Del actually promotes. They even named a latte after her. If you go there in the basement, you can get the Kate Morgan latte. I love it myself. However, doing the research, no one, not psychics, not historians, not ghost hunters. No one bothered to look at the other deaths there. And I was stunned to find that there were over 30 deaths between 1890 and, like, let's say 1984.
Wow.
And so I published those. I published the names, the details, in some cases the photos. And some of these deaths were just as weird as Kate Morgan's mysterious suicide in 1892. So also, I wanted to know when these ghost stories started. Like, I think a lot of people would be shocked to hear that the Kate Morgan ghost story actually started in 1983 for something that happened in 1892.
I started saying nothing before that time?
No, not really.
Huh.
No, it was a case of mistaken identity, bringing her back from the archives of the dead.
Okay.
A historian had decided that he was trying to find out the real story behind a poltergeist-infested room on the top floor of the Hotel del Coronado. So he went and researched, and he stumbled across this forgotten death, this forgotten suicide of Kate Morgan in 1892. And in 1983, in the October issue of, believe it or not, San Diego Home and Gardens, of all publications, this ran the story, and it went viral, and everyone jumped on it. The networks jumped on it, the paranormal shows, the paranormal books, the paranormal, everyone jumped on it. The problem was, it wasn't discovered until like 1989 that was not her room. That was never the room Kate Morgan had stayed in. So what do you do with a murder or suicide or mysterious death that happened in 1892, which you attributed to a certain room that turned out to not be the room at all? Well, once you found the right room, suddenly the right room becomes haunted by Kate Morgan. So does the Kate Morgan ghost story have any merit? I'm not going to judge, because people have stayed there, have had some paranormal activity, or some things that they claim to have paranormal activity. When I did my photo shoot at the Dell, we actually rented the poltergeist room, and we rented the Kate Morgan room, as it's called. And we actually brought in a model and dressed her up as Kate Morgan and had her parading all around that room. And sure enough, one of my crew members got a call at 5 a.m, and she answered the phone, and no one was on the other line. It sounded like mechanical noises in the background. Now, that is actually one of the very long-standing paranormal claims about that room, is that around between 5 and 5:30, the phone would ring on occasion, and no one would be on the other line. So, is that paranormal? I can't judge yes or no. I can say that is one of the paranormal claims, and that it did happen to us.
Mm-hmm. Now, the photographs that I've seen from your book are absolutely beautiful. I mean, there's the fantastic photographs. But out of the 8 hotels, was there one in particular? And I know it's I suppose it's like asking which is your favorite child. Which shoot probably did you enjoy the most? Had the most surprises, or the most strange activity going on?
Oh, yes. Well, you've asked about 3-4 different questions.
Yes.
let me just say each location had its own personality, and each photo shoot had its own personality. Some were more fun than others, because I would bring a crew of about 8 to 10, sometimes more people, and each one brought their own baggage and their own energy and their own ideas and creativity, and it was great fun. Now, I didn't let everyone ghost hunt, because I wanted to keep control of the environment. But if one or two of the models that came out, if they had an interest, and I saw that they had a pretty good working foundation, and that they can follow orders, and they can, they have a genuine interest, I would actually train them, as long as someone with experience was with them to validate much of what was going on. That was very important, is to have a mixture of new people and experienced people together in a controlled environment. And having said that, there are several locations that do stick out in my mind in Volume 1. The Alexandria Hotel, that was one of my favorite shoots, but that's because the history of that building is my favorite of all the buildings. I mean, that was the Plymouth Rock for the East Coast film companies that were coming to Los Angeles for the first time to set up shop or to look over the area for possible winter shooting. So, you know, D.W. Griffith, Mary Pickford, eventually Charles Chaplin, Rudolph Valentino was definitely there. This was Hollywood before Hollywood. And it dominated the social scene for the film industry. It was the epicenter. It was literally called Rome in one of the old movie fan magazines from like 1919, 1920. And the stories are just wonderful and sadly forgotten. So I tried to bring as many of these stories back and put them in my book. You know, the fist fight between Charles Chaplin and Louis B. Mayer, who would later be head of MGM. You know, and I restaged that fist fight. So I found someone that was a Charlie Chaplin imitator, a great guy. And I found another one that looked like a young Louis B. Mayer. That was hard to find. But we actually restaged that fight scene in roughly the same area where it took place inside the Alexandria. That was a lot of fun. Now, when we were shooting in the Alexandria Suite, we were shooting in the Valentino Suite. We were shooting there all day long and into the night. And what ended up happening is after the sun went down, we were still shooting, and it got real gloomy and real creepy. And this room hadn't been touched since 1970. So the floors were warped, the carpet was bleached out, the wallpaper was shabby. The furniture, the old Victorian reproduction furniture that was brought in 1970, by this time, by the 2000 teens, it looked like it was from 1917. You know, it was beat up and broken down. And so we were up there shooting, and the leasing agent who had made it possible for us to shoot there, he comes in after work, and he's being a little bit of a pest. So I gave him some busy work. So I gave him a spotlight and put him in the adjoining room to where we were shooting. We were shooting in the bedroom area. We put him in kind of the living room area with a spotlight and just said, just shine it on the model. So he's back in this room all by himself, shining this little spotlight through this narrow, tiny little hallway into the room that we're shooting. So finally got him out of the way. So I'm trying to set up the shot. And suddenly, after about 15 minutes, he starts saying, "Can you guys hurry up the shot, please? It's getting very cold, and I'm getting very scared back here." And I was like, "Okay, sure, I'll do it, yeah." And continued shooting, and then, about 5 minutes later, suddenly this door slams really loud. The leasing agent screams. The spotlight that he's holding, the beam is bouncing all over the walls, and everyone jumped, including me. And so I had to take leadership and get everyone to calm down, even though our adrenaline was just pumping, because we knew what door it was, and it was a door that we had tried to close earlier in the day, only it would not budge an inch. We thought it was permanently in an open position because of the warped tiles and floorboard underneath the door. And I didn't want to risk breaking the door trying to close it. So I just said, let's shoot around the door. Well, that was the door that slammed shut. And so that's something that, there were 7 of us in that room, and we all heard that. And it was so loud that literally all the glass in the entire suite rattled. And that glass is probably from, 1911, for all I know. So that's one of those incidents that you'll never forget. Now, as far as the place that had the most paranormal activity altogether would be the Glen Tavern in Santa Paula, which is outside of Ventura, the city of Ventura. in Ventura County. And that was a building that opened in 1911, and it's been featured on a lot of the paranormal shows. But I actually had the final night of my photo shoot there. And I should point out that when I do my photo shoots there, we're living in the hotel for about 3 to 4, sometimes 5 days straight. And a lot of us are occupying the haunted rooms as well as we're shooting in them. And we try to pick the hotel during a time when it's not very busy, so that in some cases we're practically the only people there. And that was the case at the Glen Tavern Inn when we were shooting there. And voices from the hallway on the 3rd floor were disrupting my photo shoot. It was driving me nuts. And again, it was like the story I told you about Warner Brothers. It was consonants and vowels, but I couldn't put them together. It was just like gibberish. But it sounded like 2 men and a woman talking. And eventually I was kind of able to pinpoint that it was behind a door of one of the guest rooms on the 3rd floor that we weren't occupying. It was kind of in the middle of the hallway, and no one was in that room because we had the whole 3rd floor to ourselves. So luckily, I did have some recorders going at the time, and I did catch these very faint voices that were disrupting the photo shoot. And listening back to the audio, I could finally make out some of the things that were said. And one was like, "Leave us." Very, very encouraging to hear.
Oh, yeah.
"Leave us. Get out of here." And the one that fascinated me the most were 2 words. It was Glen Tavern. Again, what's interesting about that is that when the Glen Tavern Inn opened in 1911, up until World War II, that's exactly what it was called. It was called the Glen Tavern, and that was it. Then during World War II, it was acquisitioned by the military, and it was like a dormitory for females in a nearby military base, all women kind of dormitory. And then after the war, it got released back to its owner. They had to put it back together as a hotel again. And when they reopened it in the mid to late 40s, it became the Glen Tavern Hotel. And then in the 1980s, during another renovation to the property, it became the Glen Tavern Inn. And it's been the Glen Tavern Inn ever since. However, just hearing the words Glen Tavern does raise the question, is the ghost from that era, from 1911 to 1940.
It makes sense. We have a question from Brian on Skype, and he wants to know, have you ever followed up on some of the locations of buildings that have been taken down to see if the new buildings have had any similar experiences?
I don't know. I've never heard any stories about the RFK Learning Center. I'm kind of keeping my antenna up to hear about that. In most cases, but definitely not all cases. In most cases, when the building's torn down, the ghosts go with it. It really depends on the nature of the haunting. Whatever is haunting there, are they connected to the history of the building, or are they connected to the land underneath? That being said, tomorrow night I'll be participating in a paranormal investigation at the Olin House in Beverly Hills. Now that's a house that is not terribly old, but it's built on Cielo Drive, just up the street from where the Manson murders took place in 1969.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And that has long been heralded as a place that has some connection with the hauntings had some kind of connection with the Manson murders, and then it has connections with other things that might have happened in the area as well. So David is hosting a paranormal investigation on the 12th and the 26th, offering barbecue, I should say, and he was gracious enough to invite me over. And I met him for the first time last Saturday. And he gave me a tour of the house, and we did have something weird happen in what was called the earthen wall room. And it's this weird, funky room. I loved it. It's the one room that felt haunted, because I've been in so many haunted places for so long that people constantly ask me, well, how do you feel about this space? And how do you feel? I just feel desensitized, because I usually stay in the most haunted rooms when I go to these hotels and whatnot. So it's like, I don't feel anything. But every now and then I'll go into a room and it's like, and you know how it feels? I hate to say this. It feels like home. So the earthen wall room felt like home. And it's funny because I was there with a friend of mine who runs a podcast herself called, her name's Tammy, and she runs Holly Weird Paranormal. And so we were just hanging out in this room because I didn't want to leave, because I thought, this room has a great, cool, haunted vibe to it. And sure enough, both of us got super cold while just sitting in that room in the middle of a Los Angeles Saturday afternoon. The room doesn't have air conditioning. It's just, it's kind of a bare room with exposed beams and pipes, and conduit, overhead, and this earthen wall, which occupies most of the room.
All right, Craig. Well, we're going to have to finish up here. We got a minute left in the show, so.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for being with us. That's it. Bizarre LA on Facebook, correct?
It's actually Bizarre Los Angeles on Facebook. My website is bizarrela.com.
There you go.
And then on Instagram, it's bizarre_Los_Angeles. So
thank you for being on this evening. It's a great show, and we'll have to revisit Hollywood. I haven't been out there for a while, but I would love to travel again and see the sights. Next week will be another exciting show here on Going to Bizarre, and don't forget to tune into our YouTube site, Mr. UFO's Secret Files. And, of course, the archives are here on KCOR. And Tim will be talking to you shortly, and you'll be finishing up on our book on the Ashtar transmissions.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.